This is a compilation of notes on many, many different topics of Rav Soloveicik's classes over the course of years. I familiar with it. It's called Masora. It's published by the OU. And I found a very, very fascinating essay on Sefiras HaOmer. And I sent it out in the WhatsApp. So if you want to follow it inside, you certainly can. Now, he wants us to take a look at the beginning of Parshas Behar. So I'm going to tell you, how are you? I'm going to tell you where to find that. If you have the page number before I get it, let me know.
Kuf Tzadi Gimel.
Kuf Tzadi Gimel? Wait a second, my page numbers are a little different. You have the same Chumash that I do?
Kuf Tzadi Gimel.
Oh, I see. Oh, on the bottom left. Very good. Kuf Tzadi Gimel.
Okay, so what's it?
Okay. So we're looking in Sefer Vayikra, Perek Chaf Hey, which is Parshas Bahar. And this is the Parsha of Shemitah. And we count 7 years. And the 7th year is sanctified as Shemitah. And then in Pasuk Ches, the Torah says, "V'safarta lecha sheva shabsos hashanim." So we take the cycle of 7 years and we multiply it by 7. And that'll give us 49 years. Teshav Arboim Shana. And then, when we're about to enter into the 50th year, Havarta Shofar, they will blow the shofar, Trua, B'chodesh Hashvi, that's in the month of Tishrei, V'esor l'chodesh b'yom HaKippurim. And then in Pasuk Yud, V'kidashtem Eishnas HaChamishim Shana. So we have 7 cycles of 7 years. At the end of each cycle of 7 years, we have the 7th year as a Shemitah year. And then after 7 cycles, which equals 49 years, then we sanctify the 50th year as Yovel. So in my Chumash that you gave me, I have a little ribbon. You have this ribbon here? If you have such a ribbon, put the ribbon here on this page so we don't lose the place. And keep in mind, Pasuk Ches, V'safarta lecha, etc. Okay. Now, he wants us to look a little bit earlier in Parshas Emor, in Perek Chaf Gimel, Pasuk Tes Vav. So that's, I think, is on page Kuf Tzadi. So you're really only turning, I think, 1 page. And you'll see Pasuk Tes Vav. Do you see that? So again, if you're turning a page back, but you're looking on the right side of the page. And that's Vayikra Chav Gimel Pasuk Tes Vav. Usfartem lachem. Now, before we had also the word Sfira, Sparta. And here's another case of Sfira. Usfartem lachem mimochras hashabos miyom haviachem es omer atnufa sheva shabosos tmimos tiena. 7 weeks made up of 7 days. So what would be the day beyond that Sfira? What number would that be? 50. And that's what it says here in Pasuk Tes Vav. Shabbos, and then in Pasuk Tes Zayin it says Tisru Chamishim Yom, and then on the 50th day Vikravtem Mincha Chadosh Hashem. How do we call that 50th day in our language? Shavuos. That's Shavuos. And we call it Shavuos because it's the culmination of 7 weeks. Shavuos. So that we have here as a separate sphera, in addition to the sphere of 7 cycles of 7 years to sanctify the 50th year as Yovel. We have 7 cycles of 7 weeks, and then we sanctify the 50th day as Chag HaShavuos. You begin to see the parallel?
Mm-hmm.
Now let's see what we could find in Parshas Re'eh. Okay, so I'm going to fast forward to Parshas Re'eh. So now there's no ribbon here, so you'll have to put a hand over here, something like that. Okay, let's see where in Parshas Re'eh you can find. That's in Sefer Dvarim, and it's on page Reish Tzadi Ches, and it's the 16th chapter of Sefer Dvarim. It's Parshas Re'eh, and it's Perek Tes Zayin, and it's Pasuk Tes. If you find it, let me know.
Yeah.
Shiva Shavuos Tispar Loch, etc., etc. And then in the next pasuk, Yud, V'asisa Chag Shavuos Lashem Elokecha. So we're counting again the 7 weeks, and then we designate the 50th day after the 7 weeks as Chag HaShavuos. So in effect, the mitzvah of Sefiras HaOmer appears not once, but twice. Once in Parshas Emor, that's in Vayikra Perek Chav Gimel Pasuk Tes Vav, and a second time in Parshas Re'eh in Perek Tes Zayin Pasuk Tes. So let's just summarize. We have in Parshas Bahar, we have the mitzvah of counting the 7 years of Shemitah, 7 times over, and then sanctifying the 50th year as Yovel. That was in Parshas Bahar, what we started with in Perek Chav He of Sefer Vayikra. And then we have 2 other spheros, one in Parshas Emor, and another in Parshas Re'eh, and both of them, Parshas Emor, Parshas Re'eh, refer to Sefiras HaOmer. So we have one mitzvah of counting Shemitah and Yovel, and another mitzvah of counting the Omer. Just that the mitzvah of counting the Omer appears not once, but twice. We're trying to figure this all out, what's going on. So Rav Soloveichik begins his discussion by quoting a Ramban in Parshas Emor. The Ramban in Parshas Emor, in the Parsha of Sefiras HaOmer, says the following: that he doesn't know if the mitzvah of Sefiras HaOmer and the mitzvah of counting Shnos HaShemitah are 2 similar mitzvahs. So fundamentally, the same idea. What's he dealing with? He says the following: Lo yadati I don't know about the counting of the 7 years times 7 of Shemitah. Im Lomar, Sheyu, I'm going to skip 2 words, I'll come right back to them. Chayovim lispar bipeh, Shonim, the years of Shemitah, and Shvuos, meaning the 7 times Shemitah. Ulevarech aleim, and to recite a bracha over them. What words did I skip? Sheyu bezdin hagadol chayovim lispar. Who's going to count the years of Shemitah and sanctify the 50th year as Yovel? It's got to be bezdin. It can't be me or you or somebody else, because we're not in charge of the calendar. But then the Ramban says that K'moshe Nasa b'Sefiras HaOmer. In Sefiras HaOmer, we require a Sefira b'Peh. We have to count out loud, and we require a bracha. In Sefiras Shemitah v'Yovel, when Bezdin counts, the Ramban is not sure about it. Lo yadati, I'm not sure. Im lomar shtiu Bezdin hagol chayovim lispar shonim u'shvuos. O lomar sheyizaru Bezdin b'minyan. Maybe the Torah in Parshas Bahar, in Perek, what was it there? In Perek Kaf Hey, maybe the Torah is just commanding Bezdin to be very careful about the minyan, meaning they have to know exactly what year we're up to in Shemitah, and then what Shemitah cycle we're up to in the 7 Shemitah cycles. But they don't have to count out loud. There's no formal verbal counting, and they don't make a bracha on it. And then he adds, "V'yikadshu shnas hachamisha," and they will sanctify the 50th year. So again, just to summarize, the Ramban vacillates on the question as to whether or not Sefiras Shnos HaShemitah, like Sefiras HaOmer, requires a formal verbal sefira, a counting out loud, with a bracha, or no, it's just Yizaru Bezdin B'minyan, that Bezdin just has to make sure. Do you remember when, I don't know what they call it, we used to write, like this 1 line, 2 lines, 3 lines, 4 lines, and then a line across, for the number 5. Does that have a name to it? I don't know. Anyway, he's saying that basically Bezdin, should have some sort of a chart or a whiteboard where every year they add another line, until they get 7 lines. And then they do it again and again and again, 7 times over. But there's no requirement of counting out loud as a formal act of a mitzvah with a bracha. No. Just they have to be careful that they don't get messed up,
I would say that even if there's a few count out loud, I don't see where a bracha would come in.
Well, no, he's asking whether there's a mitzvah to count. Is it a mitzvah of counting, or is it just a mitzvah to be careful?
Keep track of it.
Keep track. Excellent, keep track. If it's a mitzvah to counting, then counting always has to be bipeh. And if you obligate me to count, there's a ma'aseh mitzvah of counting, and that's what the Torah is commanding me, and therefore I make a bracha like I would do on every other mitzvah. And Bezdin will make the bracha.
Doesn't speak. One person has to make a bracha.
Well, probably the Rosh Bezdin, the Nasi Bezdin, whoever it is.
Yeah.
So that's the Ramban. Now he quotes the Chizkuni. Have you ever heard of the Chizkuni? The Chizkuni was one of Chachmei Balei HaTosfos, probably 9 centuries ago, 1,000 years ago, something like that. And we didn't have access to the Chizkuni. Probably after the Holocaust, they wanted to be nice to us, so the Vatican, whoever it was, gave us, the manuscripts. All right. Now, the Chizkuni writes the following. He starts by quoting the pasuk in Bahar. So I asked you to keep the ribbon there. And what are the first two words in pasuk Ches? V'safarta lecha. Notice, as we'll see here in the Chizkuni, that the word lecha is in the singular. Usfarta lecha sheva shabsos shonim lefisha ein kana ela sfira achas. What does that mean, sfira achas? How many times did the Torah command the counting of the Shemitah? Once, only once. Vehi, bezdin. So that there's only one sfira of Zion in Shnos HaShemitah, and it's an obligation on bezdin. Lefichach, he says, therefore, ein tzarich levarach. We don't recite a bracha. HaOmer, okay, now we go back to Emor, you turn that page. What does it say there? Usfartem lachem, in the plural. And he says the following, that Omer ksiv be'shtei sfiros. Achas beparshas Emor, the achas beparshas re'eh. Now, which one is written in the plural? That's Parshas Emor. It says Usfartem lachem. But now take a look in Parshas Re'eh, in Perek Tezayin Pasuk Tes, Shiva Shavuos Tispar Lach. What is Lach? In the plural or the singular? In the singular. So what the Chizkuni is saying is that if we only had Parshas Re'eh, where the Torah uses the singular, we would not have a mitzvah of counting, which would require bepeh and with a bracha, but rather we have to be very careful with the numbers. What was the word you used, Shalom? We have to keep track? Was that the phrase? We have to keep track. But, says the Chizkuni, why do we count Sefiras HaOmer bepeh and recite a bracha? Because there's shtei Sefiros. In addition to the Sefira and Parshas Re'eh, which is written in the singular, there's another Sefira in Parshas Emor, and there it says Usfartem lachem in the plural, and therefore tzarich levarach. So Rav Soloveichik asks the following question: I don't get it. Just because the Torah repeated Sefiras HaOmer twice, therefore we make a bracha. And secondly, Rav Soloveichik is wondering why in Parshas Re'eh is there a Sefira for Bezdin? Why is Bezdin in charge of Sefiras HaOmer? We know that Sefiras HaOmer is obligatory on each individual. It's not an obligation on Bezdin. But at the end of the day, Rav Soloveichik wants to understand why is it that if the Torah utilizes the singular form, like we saw both in Parshas Bahar with regard to counting the Shiva, the 7 years of the Shemitah, and we saw it in Parshas Re'eh with regard to Sefiras HaOmer. In both those cases, it was written in the singular. Therefore, the Chizkuni says that who's going to fulfill this obligation? Bezdin. Whereas if it's written in the plural, then, as we saw in Parshas Emor, then it's not a chiyuv on Bezdin, but rather each and every one of us has to count. And Rav Soloveichik says that we can categorize mitzvos into 2 separate categories. One is a chovas yachid, and the other is a chovas tzibur. Is there anyone here who's familiar with that categorization, that definition? That we can classify some mitzvahs as a yachid, an obligation incumbent upon the individual, and other mitzvahs as obligatory on the tzibur, on the entire community as a community.
We got the Torah. We got the Torah.
So that's a machlokas. I don't want to get into it now between the Ramban and Reb Chaim Brisker. Believe it or not, Reb Chaim Brisker used to get off a train if he thought he would miss Kriyas HaTorah on Sheni v'Chamishi because he held it was a Chovas Yachid. But the Ramban writes explicitly that Kriyas HaTorah is a Chovas Tzibur. But what's the difference? Who can explain in plain terms what's the difference between a Chovas Yachid and a Chovas Tzibur? I just want to get myself a drink. I left it here. Yeah, anybody can help me out here?
Does the Yachid require a minyan?
Which? Yachid or Tzibur? Tzibur, correct. Yachid doesn't require a minyan. But what does it mean when I say that the chiyuv evolves on a tzibur? What does really that mean?
I guess, like I said, on Bezdin.
Well,
Bezdin on
Bezdin-
behalf of the
Correct, excellent. Bezdin on behalf of the tzibur. But what I'm asking is, inherently or essentially, how is a chovas tzibur different than a chovas yachid? Who's obligated in a chovas tzibur? Is it you? Is it you? Is it me? Who's obligated? Nobody. The tzibur is obligated.
as a unit.
The tzibur, what? Right, the
It's a
tzibur,
unit.
but it's everybody as an entity, as a new entity. It's not the amalgamation or the sum total of all the individuals. Let's say, for example, there are 1 million Jews alive at this point, let's say. It doesn't mean that 1 million Jews are obligated in the mitzvah. If it's a chovas tzibur, it means that there's one single obligation. The tzibur, have you ever heard of something called Gestalt theory? So in Gestalt, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, if you've ever heard of such a thing. You know, it's like if you've ever been to, I don't know, probably, well, in my day, you had to go to Disney World, but today probably they have it in, you know, you could probably buy it in a store. But they used to have these computer screens where you press on boxes and then you begin to see parts of a face. And then, you know, the question is, when can you identify that face? You know what I mean? Like maybe it's a famous, I don't know, president. I don't want to talk about presidents these days because I get the heebie-jeebies, but, you know, you know what I'm saying? And the theory is that even if you had all the parts of the puzzle, which would make up the entire face, the face itself is greater than the sum total of all these pieces. There's something beyond. That's called a tzibur. A tzibur means it's not 10 individuals that make up a tzibur. It's an entity that goes beyond the tzibur. In Brisk, this is very fundamental. And here what we're saying is that depending upon whether the Torah uses a singular form in terms of Sefira or a plural form, is going to define the difference between a chiyuv on the tzibur or a chiyuv on the yachid. Now I'm going to ask you the following question. This is like matching. I'm going to put lecha and lachem, singular and plural. Then I'm going to give you Bezdin and every individual. Which one belongs to which?
Sort of switch.
Well, I don't remember where it's.
No, lecha is actually for the tzibur.
Why? Why is that
I
so?
don't know. I don't remember why.
Isn't it strange? It's counterintuitive. Rav Soloveichik, wait, Shalom, you'll give me the answer, but give me a minute to formulate the question. I want to point out what's paradoxical here. What's counterintuitive. I would have said that lachem in the plural addresses the entire tzibur. And lecha is pointing to you, each individual as a yochid. Go ahead, Shalom.
The tzibur is a singular thing. It's a single entity. The tzibur. That's lecha.
Excellent. So this is the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon says that when the Torah uses the singular, it's not addressing the individual, but rather addressing the entity of the tzibur, which is one indivisible whole. And who's going to represent it, Gedayo? Bezdin. Bezdin is going to be the representative of the entire tzibur to implement a chiyuv on the tzibur. So now, when it says usfartem lachem mimachras haShabbos, who is obligated in that mitzvah of usfartem lachem? Every individual. Kol yachid v'yachid. If the Torah, on the other hand, uses the word what? Lecha, then it's referring to a chiyuv tzibur. And the Chizkuni is telling us that when regard to a chiyuv tzibur, it's only zehirus. Zehirus means that Bezdin has to make sure that the calculation is correct, is accurate. We have to keep the cheshbon. And that's not a mitzvah of sfira, it's a mitzvah of zehirus. And there's no bracha. So therefore, where there's only one parsha of sfira, like in the case of Shemitah, and the Torah employs the grammatical singular, and it says, again, as we saw, that's where the ribbon is here, usfarta lecha sheva shabbos hashoyim, then it's a chiyuv lecha on the tzibur, and who has to represent the tzibur? It's Bezdin. But here in Sefiras HaOmer, how many times do we have the mitzvah of Sefira? Twice. We have it in Parshas Re'eh, right? Let's fast forward. Shiva Shavuos Tisbar Lach. Lach in the singular. So who is now going to be in charge of counting the Sefira in Parshas Re'eh? Bezdin. But we have another Sefira, says the Chizkuni, in Parshas Emor. And there it says, Usfartim Lachem. Now we have a mitzvah of Sefira, full-fledged mitzvah of Sefira, that's incumbent upon every individual with a bracha. But now the question is, why did the Torah in Sefer Dvarim in Re'eh add another mitzvah that devolves upon whom? On the tzibur, represented by Bezdin. In the case of Shemitah and Yovel, I understand very well, because the mitzvah of Shemitah is part of the what we call the Seder Azmanim. And who are you to come forward and say this is the first year of the Shemitah, this is the 7th year? You know, that's something that the tzibur as a whole is in charge of, represented by Bezdin. But now the question is, according to the Chizkuni, there are two separate mitzvahs in Sefiras HaOmer. In Sefiras HaOmer, there's the mitzvah in Parshas Emor, which is incumbent upon every individual, Sfartem Lachem, Reuven, Shimon, Levi. But now there's an additional mitzvah of Sefiras HaOmer incumbent upon Bezdin. Why? What's the shaykhus between Sefiras HaOmer and Bezdin? Sefiras HaOmer is my own personal obligation. Why did the Torah in Sefer Dvarim repeat the mitzvah of Sefiras HaOmer in order to obligate the tzibur usfarta lach in the singular, represented by Bezdin? Well, what's
because the Omer was brought on behalf of the tzibur. Maybe that was
okay, but again, I understand very well that the Omer is a chovas tzibur, but now we're counting the Omer, and the counting of the Omer has to lead us all the way up to the 50th day of Chag HaShavuos, which is Matan Torah. Like the Sefer Chinuch says, the reason for Sefiras HaOmer is to gradually build up after Yetzias Mitzrayim until we reach the level of Maimon Har Sinai. Why is Bezdin involved over here? A whole new parsha. What?
To keep the count to bring us to Shavuos.
Excellent. Beautiful, because we need to sanctify the 50th day with the Kedusha of Shavuos, of Regel, of a Yontif. Who's going to be in charge of deciding whether it's the 50th day or not, whether it's Kadosh B'Ktur? Who has to sanctify? What's the... Here, I'm going to backtrack for a minute. What's the paradigmic case of a Chovas Tzibur in which Bezdin represents the Tzibur? Kiddush HaChodesh. HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodashim. Who's going to determine whether it's Rosh Chodesh? You, me, him, that, Larry, Sam, Beryl, Shmerel? Who? It's got to be the entire tzibur represented by Bezdin. So whenever we have a cheshbon of Zmanim, who's in charge of Zmanim? Bezdin is representing the tzibur. So Rav Soloveichik says that's what the Chizkuni means. The mitzvah Sefiras HaOmer has tvei bezunder mitzvahs. Tvei dinim, as we call it in Bris. There's one chovas yachid and one chovas tzibur. In Parshas Emor, we have a chovas yachid. Each person is counting a sphera, let's say, in order to lead up to Kabbalah Satorah and climb and ascend the spiritual heights. But there's another mitzvah of Sefiras HaOmer, which he bases on the Chizkuni, and that's in Parshas Re'eh and Sefer Dvarim, and there the Torah employs the grammatical singular in order to tell us that it's a chiv on Bezdin. And why is a chiv on Bezdin? Now it becomes very beautiful. It says in Parshas Re'eh, it says Shiva Shavuos Tispar Loch, blah blah blah, and then the very next pasuk is Vasisa Chag Shavuos LaShem Elokecha. It's a perfect parallel to Parshas Bahar. What do we see in Parshas Bahar? Usfarta lecha sheva shabsel shonim sheva pavim, blah blah blah. Vavartem, and then it says v'kidashtem eshnas hachamishin. So the parallel here is between Parshas Bahar, which is a counting that projects us to the number 50, and what's going to be the number 50? Yovel. And now we have its parallel in Sefiras HaOmer counting 49 days. The Torah addresses Tispar Loch in order to achieve the number 50, which is going to be Chag HaShvuos. Is that not incredible? Mamish incredible. But now the Rav wants to go a step further. And he wants to understand, why is it that if it's a chiyuv tzibur and Bezdin is representing the tzibur, we have that now according to Chizkuni in both counting the years of Shemitah and in the Omer, why is there no bracha? Why can't Bezdin, as representing the tzibur, recite a bracha? And we have other examples of a chovas tzibur where there is a bracha, but not this one. So the Rav says something unbelievable. The Gemara tells us in Masechta Menachos that ein mevarchim el al mitzvah shehi gmar mitzvah. What does that mean? If I have a mitzvah that develops in parts, I have to do A, then I have to do B, I have to do C, etc., then I don't make a bracha on such a mitzvah. Because there's no individual ma'aser mitzvah that you could isolate, which is the quintessential mitzvah, in other words, which contains the essence of the mitzvah. So, for example, I'll give you a funny kind of example. On the night of Pesach, we drink how many cups of wine? 4. And not everyone will ascribe to this, but many Rishonim will say you need all 4. It's 4 or bust. Now, what bracha do we make on the Daled Kosos? Bori Pri Agofen. There's no bracha asher kidshanim mitzvos v'tzivanu. And the answer, says the Avudraham, who lived about 6 centuries ago, is because there's so many different parts to this mitzvah that I can't make a bracha. Because I don't have a Gemar mitzvah. So Rav Soloveichik now asks the following question. When we count the Omer, what kind of accounting are we implementing? Is it a sphera lahaba or a sphera lisha ovar? I'll read to you his language here. Because what I'm doing for you, I mean, I deserve it salash for this, because I'm summarizing pages and pages of very fine print. I don't know if you can appreciate that. Okay. In any event, he says the following. Just find the feed. Oh. Here it is. says, Yesh inyan echad shel sfira. There's one category of sfira, which is lispar lahaba. What does it mean, lahaba? The sfira is for the future, meaning it's a series that will culminate at the very end of the count. That's called lahaba. U'mitzvah zu eino nigmeres v'nishlemes ad sheyigmru lispars kol hamemtes. The od yesh mitzvah shel sfira, v'hu inyan sfira l'sha'avar, meaning you've reached a certain, let's say, a date, a calendar date, and now you count it. Lahaba means towards the future. And l'sha'avar means I'm counting this day because once the day has already arrived, now I have to count it. Says Rav Soloveichik, herein lies the difference between the Yachid and Bezdin. When the Yachid is counting, he's counting l'sha'avar. Hayom yom echad la'omer. Hayom shnei yomim la'omer. He's counting that day, right? The stars came out. The day is here. It's 22, and he counts it. Then, says Rav Soloveichik, the Gemar mitzvah, he accomplishes the mitzvah immediately when he counts that day. But when Bezdin is in charge of counting, that's called a Sfira Lahaba. What does it mean, Lahaba? What's the purpose of counting, let's say, 49 years of Shemitah? In order to sanctify the 50th year as Yovel. So the counting, if I could use this term, is anticipatory. And the Gemar mitzvah is really just sanctifying the 50th year. In the case of Sefiras HaOmer, from the perspective of Parshas Re'eh, where the Torah says in Dvarim, Shiva Shavusas Tishbar Loch, what's the purpose of counting? In order to sanctify the 50th day, V'asisa Chag Shavuos Lashem Elokecha. And then Afkamid is going to be where they make a brach on it. So according to Rav Soloveichik, it's not that Bezdin is inferior, a mitzvah that's incumbent on the tzibur, and Bezdin fulfills that mitzvah on behalf of the tzibur is inferior and it falls short of a chovas yachid. No, that's not what it means. What it means is that in Sfira, you can only make a bracha on a l'sha'avar because that's the Gemar mitzvah. When you count, then you've achieved the mitzvah. But if it's lahaba, then, as we said before, that's not a Gemar mitzvah. So you can't count with a bracha because a bracha requires a Gemar mitzvah. And he quotes the Gemara, Menachas Daf Mem Beis Amud Beis, Dechol mitzvah shasiyasa Gemar mitzvah tzarich levareh. Kol mitzvah dasiyasa lav Gemar mitzvah eino tzarich levareh. Ubishtei mitzvos sfira elu, meaning those mitzvos of sfira that are incumbent upon Bezdin, hari adayin leka Gemar mitzvah ad Gemar kol ha'inyan. Ad sheyisperu memtes yom v'yikvu yom nun v'toras chag hashvuos v'chei b'sfiras shnos hashmita leka Gemar mitzvah sheyigmeru lispar kol memtes shonim v'yikadshu eshnas hachamishim shana v'kedusha shnas hayovel v'lachem in aroy shelo yavarchu bezdin hagadol al shtei sfiras elu.
The 49th day, they should make a bracha then.
Well, again, the culmination is going to be sanctifying the 50th day. You could ask the following question. Let him make a bracha on the sanctification of the 50th day. Okay, that's a question unto itself, but it's not a question on the Sfira. Keep in mind, the Rav is trying to explain the Chizkuni. The Chizkuni is trying to figure out when we do make a bracha on Sfira, when we don't make a bracha on Sfira. You hear what Shalom is asking. Why not make a bracha on the Kiddush of the 50th day? But the answer is because the kiddush is chal mimela. In other words, there may be an obligation of Bezdin to actually, I don't know, to verbalize that today is the 50th day. I don't know, 50th year. That I don't know. But at least as far as the counting is concerned, when I count, so who remembers, maybe you remember last week, I asked the question, what happens if you miss a day of Sefiras HaOmer? Do you remember this? And we had the sheet of the Bahag, the Malachas Gedolos, that if you miss a full day, you can't continue counting. Other Rishonim say no. And even the Bahag says if you miss counting at night, but you counted during the day, you can. According to Rav Soloveichik, basically, we would say that every single day of Sefira is a separate entity. Why? Because I can make a bracha because that's the Gemara mitzvah. The only problem is, Rav Soloveichik says, if I didn't count yesterday as 21, I can't count today as 22. Do you remember? We spoke about the concept of continuity. So again, what I gave you now is a short synopsis of a very long and fascinating piece that goes on and on. It's amazing. I just want to add one footnote here. And it seems, as I'm going to try to explain it, that the singular form does not by definition mean that there's a mitzvah of Sefira Baal Peh with a verbal and a bracha. Why do I say so? There's a footnote here that quotes a Chassam Sofer. I'm sorry, that quotes a Nod Yehuda. They were around the same time. Nod Yehuda is before the Chassam Sofer. The Nod Yehuda finds a shalah. Shalah is the Shnei Luchos Habris. And according to the text in the shalah, the Nod Yehuda claims there was a mistake in the printing. When it says in the Torah, V'safra la shivas yamin. Okay, we're talking now about what's called a zava. I mean, every woman today is considered a zava, but that's all harchakos and gzeros and so forth. But in the Torah law, if a woman sees 3 days consecutively during Yemei Ziva, she becomes a zava. And then she has to count Sheva Yomim Nikiyim, right? 7 Nikiyim. And the Torah says, V'safra la Shivas Yomim. In the text, which the Nod Yehuda claims is an erroneous text of the Shalah says that Yesh levarech al Sefiras Zayin Nikiyim Kimoshe mevarchim al Sefiras HaOmer. That a woman should make a bracha as she counts every day of the Zayin Nikiyim. By the way, this doesn't only apply to a woman. It would apply to a man as well, with regard to a Zav. So if a man is a Zav, he also has to count Zayin Nikiyim. But the Torah only says it explicitly in the case of a Safra La. Now, La is in the singular. And the Nod Yehuda goes ballistic. And he says this can't be the right text. He says the following. He says that for sure there's no counting of Zayin Nikiyim. Ein zu mitzvah. The Eina kavanas haposuk b'v'safra la al asfira b'peh ela al hashgacha shiyu nikiyim. She just has to make sure that she has 7 days of nikiyim. Right? Like I said before, the line's going this way with the line across. There's no separate mitzvah of counting the 7 days of nikiyim. But what bothers me is here it says law. And that's in the singular. We just established, according to Rav Soloveichik, that whenever it says the singular, it's a mitzvah sphere b'peh with a bracha. But I have a feeling that in this context, the word law should be interpreted as li'atzma. You follow what I mean? In In other words, when the Torah is talking about a sphere that's meaningful as a counting, like for example, the Omer, we have to count the days of the Omer, then we have to know whether it says Usfatim Lachem in the plural, addressing each individual as a Yachid, or Lecha addressing Bezdin to make sure that we know when is the 50th day and sanctifies Chag HaShavuos. But in the case of a Zav or a Zava, the word Sphira here is something that a person has to keep account of, la liatzma, for her own purposes, because otherwise she might get messed up. She'll go too late or too early, and therefore it's not a real mitzvah of Sphira B'Peh with a bracha.
Yeah, it doesn't say love, it says love.
Right.
To herself.
That's what I wanted to suggest. I don't know.
I'm sure it says love from the car.
Correct. Don't
Yeah.
forget to have a darshan of male female also.
Okay, then. So that's
Oh, yeah.
as far as brisk is concerned. Now, what time is it now?
42.
8:45.
42, yeah, 3 minutes
Right.
or more.
So we started at 7:45. So I would suggest the following. I don't want to do a botch-up job here. So maybe next week we'll spend the entire, 55 minutes or an hour, whatever we have, on Breslin. So instead of splitting it in one shir, maybe next week we'll try to do Breslin for entire shir. Is that okay? Okay. So then I'll thank everyone for coming, and I hope you got something out of it. It's a mind-boggling piece of Torah, and wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. Yeah. I had Yortzeit this morning for my father, so wanted to dedicate this year in memory of my father. Should have an Ilu Neshama, Rav Dovarie, Rav Ram Yehuda. And when I davened this morning for the Amud in Shachris, I said, "Do we say Tachlis?" I thought maybe there's Isru Chag. Because the night of Yom Ha'atzmaut, I went to daven in that shul, and it was mamish wild. I mean, they read this and they blew this, and it was like, it's called the McDonald shul. Yeah, because it's on a street called McDonald. McDonald was apparently the ambassador to Israel. What?
You were Netanya.
In Netanya.
McDonald was the first U.S. ambassador.
Ambassador to Israel.
Even before the state he was here before the state was formed.
Right. And he was a big fan of the Jews, I think. So they named the street after him. And
They just named
on
the street
Leil
in
Yom
Jerusalem.
Ha'atzmaut, they had a joint session or program with the Young Israel of Netanya, or of North Netanya, whatever it's called. So they had both shuls together, and I had to say Kaddish. I'm saying Kaddish for my mother-in-law, and I thought, that they told me Ma'ariv is starting at 7:35. So I got there at 7:30. They didn't get to Ma'ariv until about 8. And Ma'ariv kept going and going and going. There was no room for a Kaddish. Till finally, like at about 8:20 or so, I got my Kaddish in. So I got to hear the shofar blowing. I used to think that shofar blowing was for a different holiday called Rosh Hashanah. And then they started saying Shema Yisrael and Hashem Elokeichem this, and they opened up the Aron. I mean, it was, I know it's, the Rav Soloveichik once accidentally rolled into a B'nai Kiva minyan on Yom Ha'atzmaut. So somebody heard him mumble on his way out, "That was like the Arabian Nights," he said. Anyway, okay then.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So everyone should be well.